Sent to the cowboy who wanted no wife. The letter arrived 3 weeks before Nora Bellamy did, and Jonas Merritt burned it the same hour he read it. His sister had no right, no goddamn right, to arrange his life like he was some charity case who couldn't boil water or mend a shirt. He stood on the porch of his ranch house outside Bitter Hollow, watching the paper curl black in the fire pit, and told himself he'd send the woman straight back to Kansas City the moment she stepped off the stagecoach. Except his children had other plans. "Pa, there's a lady," his youngest, Ruthie, said from the doorway. She was 6, gap-toothed, with hair that hadn't seen a proper brush in months. "She's got a big trunk and she's asking for you." Jonas set down the harness he'd been oiling and wiped his hands on his trousers. The sun was brutal that afternoon, turning the dirt road into waves of heat. Through the shimmer, he could see her, a woman in a gray traveling dress, one hand shading her eyes, the other gripping the handle of a leather case that looked older than the ranch itself. He walked out to meet her, his boots kicking up dust with every step. Up close, she wasn't what he expected. Younger, maybe 25, with dark hair pinned tight and eyes that didn't flinch when they met his. Her dress was clean but mended in places, the kind of mending that spoke of necessity, not decoration. "Mr. Merritt," her voice was steady, but he caught the slight tremor underneath. "I'm Nora Bellamy, your sister wrote." "I know what my sister did." He didn't mean to sound harsh, but the words came out that way anyhow, "and I didn't ask for help." Nora's jaw tightened. She glanced past him toward the house, where Ruthie stood watching, and beside her now, his 2 boys, Samuel, 10, and Thomas, 8, both staring like she was some kind of curiosity hauled in from the traveling show. "Your sister said you had children who needed tending," Nora said. "That's why I came." "My children are fine." "Are they?" She looked at Ruthie again, at the dirt on her face and the dress that hung crooked because half the buttons were missing. "Because that little girl hasn't had a woman's care in some time, Mr. Merritt. Anyone can see that." Jonas felt heat crawl up his neck. It wasn't anger exactly, more like shame dressed up as defensiveness. His wife, Catherine, had been gone 2 years now, taken by fever so sudden he barely had time to say goodbye. Since then, he'd done his best, but best wasn't always good enough when you were running a cattle ranch and trying to keep 3 children fed, clothed, and out of trouble. "I didn't ask you to come here," he said again, quieter this time. "No," Nora agreed, "but I'm here now, and unless you plan to pay my fare back to Kansas City, I'd appreciate a place to sleep tonight while we figure this out." He should have said no, should have walked her right back to town and put her on the next stage east. But Ruthie was watching, and so were the boys, and there was something in the way Nora stood there, not pleading, not desperate, just steady, that made him nod once, sharp, and gesture toward the house. "One night," he said, "we'll talk terms in the morning." Nora picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing and followed him across the yard. The house smelled like old smoke and unwashed laundry. Nora set her trunk down in the small room off the kitchen, Catherine's sewing room once, judging by the basket of half-finished quilts in the corner, and took stock. The children hovered in the doorway, silent and curious, while Jonas disappeared toward the barn without another word. "Your pa always this friendly?" Nora asked, turning to face them. Samuel, the oldest, crossed his arms. He had his father's dark hair and serious eyes. "He don't like strangers." "Fair enough." Nora unbuttoned her cuffs and rolled up her sleeves. "How about you 3? You like strangers?" Ruthie giggled, then slapped a hand over her mouth. Thomas, the middle child, shrugged. "Depends what you do." "What I do?" Nora looked around the kitchen, at the dirty plates stacked in the basin, the ash spilling out of the stove, the floor that hadn't seen a broom in weeks. "Well, first thing I'm going to do is make supper. You hungry?" All 3 nodded. "Good, then let's get to work." She didn't ask permission. She just started moving, clearing the table, stoking the fire, sending Thomas to fetch water from the pump, and Samuel to find whatever vegetables might be left in the root cellar. Ruthie stayed close, watching every move with wide eyes. "You know how to cook?" the girl asked. "I know how to make food that won't kill you," Nora said. "That good enough?" Ruthie nodded solemnly. By the time Jonas came back from the barn, the kitchen smelled like fried salt pork and cornbread, and the table was set with mismatched plates that had actually been washed. The children sat waiting, hands folded, looking cleaner than they had an hour ago. Jonas stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Supper's ready," Nora said, not looking at him, "if you want it." He hesitated, then took his seat at the head of the table. They ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the crackle of the stove. Nora watched the children devour their food like they hadn't eaten properly in days, and something twisted in her chest. She'd seen hunger before, knew what it looked like when people were doing their best and still falling short. When the meal was finished, Jonas stood and carried his plate to the basin. "Thank you," he said, the words stiff and formal. Then he walked out onto the porch, letting the door swing shut behind him. Ruthie leaned across the table. "He liked it," she whispered. "He don't say thank you unless he means it." Nora smiled despite herself. "That's good to know." She found him an hour later, standing by the fence that circled the horse pen. The sun was sinking fast, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Nora wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked over, her boots crunching in the dry grass. "Your sister didn't tell me much," she said, "just that you needed help and that you'd lost your wife." Jonas didn't look at her. "What else you need to know? Why you're so set against having someone here?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because I don't need anyone feeling sorry for me. I can handle my own business." "I'm sure you can." Nora leaned against the fence beside him. "But those children in there, they need more than you can give them on your own. That's not weakness, Mr. Merritt. That's just the truth." He turned to her then, his eyes hard. "You don't know a damn thing about my children. I know Ruthie's wearing a dress with no buttons and Thomas has a cough he's been trying to hide all evening. I know Samuel looks at you like he's afraid to disappoint you, and I know you're carrying so much weight you can barely stand straight." She met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not here to take over your life. I'm here because your sister thought you might need a hand. If you don't want that, fine, but don't pretend it's pride keeping you from accepting help. It's fear." Jonas's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he might yell at her, or worse, throw her off the property. But instead, he just shook his head and walked back toward the house, his shoulders slumped like a man twice his age. Nora stayed by the fence, watching the last light fade from the sky, and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning, Jonas found her in the barn. She was up before dawn, mucking out stalls with a determination that bordered on reckless. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and her dress was already streaked with dirt and straw. Jonas stood in the doorway, watching her work, and felt something shift in his chest, something he didn't want to name. "You don't have to do that," he said. Nora looked up, startled. "I thought I'd make myself useful." "There's other ways to be useful that don't involve shoveling horse shit at 5 in the morning." She laughed, a real laugh, bright and unexpected. "Fair point, but I couldn't sleep, and this seemed better than sitting around." Jonas stepped inside, picking up a pitchfork. "You always this stubborn?" "Only when I'm right." They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of it oddly comfortable. When the stalls were clean, Jonas straightened and wiped his brow. "I talked to the children last night," he said. "They want you to stay." Nora set down her shovel. "And what do you want?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't noticed before. Not just competence or determination, but a kind of quiet grief that mirrored his own. Whatever had brought her to Bitter Hollow, it wasn't just about helping a widower and his children. She was running from something too. "I want my children to be happy," he said finally. "If you can help with that, then stay, but I'm not looking for anything more than someone to help around the house. That clear?" Nora nodded. "Crystal." "Good." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Whatever you're running from, it's your business. But if it shows up here, I need to know about it. I won't have my children put in danger." Nora's face went pale. "It won't," she said. "I promise." Jonas studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. and walked out into the morning light. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Nora woke early, cooked breakfast, tended to the children, cleaned the house, mended clothes, and did 100 other small tasks that Jonas hadn't realized were piling up. She was efficient, quiet, and never asked for more than she was given. The children adored her. Ruthie followed her everywhere, chattering like a magpie, while Thomas slowly warmed up, bringing her interesting rocks and asking shy questions about where she came from. Even Samuel, who'd been the most wary, started smiling at her jokes. Jonas tried to keep his distance. He told himself it was better that way, cleaner. But it was hard to ignore someone who fit into his life so easily, who made the house feel less like a tomb and more like a home. One afternoon, he came back from checking the fence line and found her sitting on the porch with Ruthie, teaching the girl how to braid hair. The sight stopped him cold. Catherine used to do that, sit with Ruthie in the evenings, weaving her hair into careful plaits while humming old songs. He'd thought that part of his life was gone forever. Nora looked up and caught his expression. She didn't say anything, just gave him a small, sad smile and went back to braiding. That night, after the children were asleep, Jonas found her in the kitchen, washing dishes by lamplight. He picked up a towel and started drying without asking. "You're good with them," he said. "They're good children, makes it easy." They weren't always this easy. He set a plate on the shelf. After Catherine died, they were lost. Samuel stopped talking for almost a month. Thomas had nightmares every night. And Ruthie, she'd just sit in Catherine's chair and stare at nothing. Nora's hands stilled in the water. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be, I'm just saying, whatever you're doing, it's working. They're coming back to life." She turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "So are you." The words hung between them, heavy and true. Jonas felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept locked tight for 2 years. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her close and bury his face in her hair and let himself feel something other than grief. But he didn't. Instead, he set down the towel and walked away, because he didn't know how to do anything else. The turning point came on a Sunday. They'd gone into town for supplies, all 5 of them crowded into the wagon. Bitter Hollow was small, barely more than a main street with a general store, a saloon, and a church at one end. People stared as they passed, and Jonas could see the questions in their eyes. Who was this woman with him? What was she doing at his ranch? Nora kept her head down, her hands folded in her lap. But when they stopped at the store, old Mrs. Pritchard cornered her by the fabric bolts. "You're the new housekeeper," the woman said, her voice loud enough to carry. "Jonas Merritt's latest charity case." Nora's face went tight. "I'm helping with the children." "Is that what they're calling it now?" Mrs. Pritchard sniffed. "Seems improper, a single woman living out there with a widower. People talk, you know." "Let them talk." Jonas stepped up beside Nora, his voice hard. "Miss Bellamy's doing more for my family in a month than most folks in this town have done in 2 years. If you've got a problem with that, you can take it up with me." Mrs. Pritchard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Then she turned and stalked away, her skirts swishing indignantly. Nora looked up at Jonas, her eyes wide. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he held her gaze. "I'm tired of people thinking they know what's best for me and mine. You've earned your place at that ranch. Don't let anyone tell you different." Something shifted in her expression, gratitude mixed with something deeper. "Thank you," she whispered. On the ride home, the children were quiet, sensing the tension. But when they reached the ranch, Ruthie tugged on Nora's skirt and said, "I'm glad you're here. Don't leave, okay?" Nora knelt down and pulled the girl into a hug. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, and she meant it. The storm came 3 days later. It started as a distant rumble, the kind that made the horses nervous and the cattle restless. By afternoon, the sky was black, and the wind was tearing at the roof shingles. Jonas worked frantically to secure the barn while Nora herded the children inside, closing shutters and lighting lamps. "Is it a tornado?" Thomas asked, his voice shaking. "Just a storm," Nora said, trying to sound calm. "We'll be fine." But when Jonas came inside, soaked and breathing hard, she could see the worry in his eyes. There's a tree down by the creek, he said, took out part of the fence. Cattle are loose. You can't go out in this, Nora said. I have to. If they scatter, we'll lose half the herd. Then I'm coming with you. He started to argue, but she cut him off. Samuel can watch the little ones. You need help, and I'm offering it. Don't be stubborn. Jonas stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Get a coat. They rode out into the storm together, the rain lashing their faces, the wind nearly knocking them from their saddles. It was brutal, dangerous work, chasing down frightened cattle in the dark, but Nora didn't falter. She moved with a confidence Jonas hadn't expected, steering her horse with skill, calling out directions when he couldn't see through the rain. By the time they got the cattle back and repaired the fence enough to hold, they were both drenched and shaking with cold. They stumbled into the barn, collapsing against the wall, breathing hard. You're crazy, Jonas said, but he was smiling. Nora laughed, breathless. You're welcome. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something inside him gave way. She was covered in mud, her hair plastered to her face, and she'd never looked more beautiful. Without thinking, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. Nora, he said, his voice rough. She went still, her eyes searching his. Jonas. He kissed her before he could talk himself out of it. It was desperate and clumsy, tasting of rain and fear and something that felt like hope. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for a moment, the storm outside didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the two of them, holding on to each other like they might disappear if they let go. When they finally pulled apart, Jonas rested his forehead against hers. I didn't want to need you, he said, but I do. God help me, I do. I know, Nora whispered. I didn't want to need you either, but here we are. That night, after they'd changed into dry clothes and checked on the children, Nora told him the truth. They sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp burning between them, and she laid it all out. The man she'd been engaged to in Kansas City, the one who'd turned violent when she tried to leave, the bruises she'd hidden under long sleeves and high collars. She'd run because it was the only way to stay alive, and Jonas's sister had offered her a lifeline without knowing the full story. If he finds me, Nora said, her voice barely audible, he'll kill me or drag me back. I'm not sure which is worse. Jonas reached across the table and took her hand. He won't find you, and if he does, he'll have to go through me first. She looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. You don't owe me that. Maybe not, but I'm giving it to you anyway. 3 months later, the man showed up. His name was Charles Whitmore, and he came riding into Bitter Hollow like he owned the place, asking questions about a woman who fit Nora's description. Jonas heard about it from the postmaster and rode into town with blood pounding in his ears. He found Whitmore at the saloon, a slick-looking man with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. You Merritt? Whitmore asked. I am. I'm looking for a woman, Nora Bellamy, heard she might be working for you. Jonas didn't blink, never heard of her. Whitmore's smile widened. That's so, because I got a letter from your sister that says different. Damn Margaret and her good intentions. Jonas kept his face blank. My sister writes a lot of letters, doesn't mean they're all true. Maybe I'll just ride out to your ranch and see for myself. You try that, Jonas said quietly, and you'll find yourself on the wrong end of a shotgun. I don't take kindly to strangers trespassing on my land. Whitmore studied him, then laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. You're protecting her, that's sweet. But she's mine, Merritt, always has been, always will be, and I'll get her back, one way or another. Jonas leaned in close. She's not yours, she's her own, and if you come near her or my family, I'll make sure you regret it. You understand me. For a moment, Whitmore's mask slipped, and Jonas saw the violence underneath. But then the man tipped his hat and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Jonas rode home fast, his heart hammering. When he reached the ranch, he found Nora on the porch with the children, teaching Ruthie how to shell peas. She looked up, saw his face, and knew immediately. He's here, she said. He's in town, but he won't stay long. Jonas dismounted and walked over, his hands gentle on her shoulders. I told him you weren't here. He didn't believe me, but I don't think he'll risk pushing it, not with the whole town watching. Nora nodded, but her hands were shaking. He won't give up, Jonas. He never does. Then we'll deal with it when he comes back. But you're not alone anymore, Nora. You hear me? Whatever happens, we are in this together. She looked at him, then at the children, who were watching with wide, worried eyes. I don't want to bring trouble to you, she said. Too late, Jonas smiled, trying to lighten the mood. You already brought trouble the day you showed up with that beat-up trunk and those stubborn eyes. Might as well stick around for the rest of it. Despite everything, Nora laughed. Ruthie climbed into her lap, and Thomas and Samuel moved closer, forming a protective circle around her. Jonas looked at them, his family, somehow bigger and stronger than it had been before, and knew he'd fight whatever came next. For them, for her. For all of them. Whitmore left town the next day, but the threat lingered like smoke. Jonas hired extra hands, kept a rifle by the door, and made sure Nora was never alone. The tension wore on everyone, but Nora refused to hide. She kept working, kept teaching the children, kept living her life with a defiance that made Jonas fall even harder for her. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to him and said, I love you. It wasn't dramatic or planned, just 3 words spoken quietly into the fading light. Jonas looked at her, at the woman who'd walked into his life uninvited and somehow become the center of it, and said, I love you too, and I'm going to marry you if you'll have me. Nora smiled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ask me properly. He got down on one knee right there on the porch, his children watching from the window, and asked Nora Bellamy to be his wife. She said yes without hesitation, and when he kissed her, the children cheered so loud the neighbors probably heard it halfway to town. They were married a month later, in a small ceremony at the church with the whole town watching. Old Mrs. Pritchard looked sour, but most folks seemed genuinely happy for them. Samuel stood as best man, Ruthie scattered wildflowers, and Thomas held the rings with the seriousness of a boy twice his age. When Jonas kissed his bride, Nora whispered, Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for staying, he whispered back. Charles Whitmore never returned. Jonas heard later that the man had moved on to California, chasing some new obsession. The threat faded, but the scars remained, a reminder that the past never fully let go, but it didn't have to define the future either. Years later, Jonas would stand on that same porch, watching his children, now grown, and remember the day Nora arrived. The way she'd walked across the yard with her battered trunk, her chin high, her eyes steady. He'd wanted to send her away, to protect himself from needing anyone ever again. But what his children saw that first day, what they recognized before he did, was that Nora wasn't there to replace their mother or fix their broken family. She was there to become part of it, scars and all. And in doing so, she'd given them something Jonas thought he'd lost forever, a reason to hope. The frontier was hard, unforgiving, and brutal, but it was also beautiful, wild, and full of second chances. And sometimes, if you were lucky, it sent you exactly the person you needed, even if you were too stubborn to ask.